What if I told you that the Roman Empire didn't fall in 476 AD, that instead it morphed, adapted, and survived for nearly 1,000 more years, under a different name, behind golden walls, and beneath a Christian cross? Welcome to the forgotten half of Rome, the Byzantine Empire. In just 15 minutes, we'll walk through the rise, the Golden Age, the religious wars, the political betrayals, and the epic fall of the empire that called Constantinople its crown. You'll see how emperors ruled like gods, how generals fought like legends, and how one city stood as the last beacon of the ancient world while Europe burned around it. But this is more than a history lesson. By the end, you'll understand why the Byzantine Empire is one of the most misunderstood forces in human history, and why its shadow still touches our world today. This is the real story, and it begins where most people think it ends, with the fall of Rome. Imagine being a citizen of Constantinople in the 6th century, a city of soaring domes, marble streets, and chanting liturgies. For you, Rome hasn't fallen. It's alive and more glorious than ever. The emperor rules not just as a sovereign, but as God's representative on earth. Yet outside the gates, invaders close in, and inside, riots can turn deadly in hours. Living in Byzantium meant existing between the sacred and the savage. For the emperors, power was a perilous crown. Justinian watched his empire burn during the Nika riots, nearly fleeing before his wife, Theodora, convinced him to stay, and crushed the revolt with brutal force. Basil II, the Bulgar slayer, blinded 15,000 men in one day to send a message. In Byzantium, mercy was rare, and survival demanded strategy colder than steel. And for enemies of the empire, from Persian shahs to Arab caliphs, from Crusader knights to Ottoman sultans, Byzantium was a glittering prize. Some saw it as a holy city, others as a decadent relic, but all agreed to conquer Constantinople was to rewrite history, and many would try. The Byzantine Empire was born from the ashes of a dying Rome. In 330 AD, Emperor Constantine moved the capital of the Roman Empire eastward, founding Constantinople, the New Rome. Strategically perched on the Bosporus, the city straddled Europe and Asia, a vital crossroad for trade, culture, and war. After the Western Roman Empire collapsed in 476 AD, Byzantium stood as its heir, culturally Roman, linguistically Greek, and spiritually Christian. By the 6th century under Emperor Justinian I, Byzantium reached its first golden age. Justinian dreamed of restoring the Roman Empire's former glory, and his armies, led by the general Belisarius, reconquered parts of Italy, North Africa, and Spain. Simultaneously, Justinian commissioned the Hagia Sophia, one of the most magnificent cathedrals ever built, but ambition came at a price. The empire was drained by war, natural disasters, and the plague of Justinian, which killed nearly a third of its population. Byzantium's survival often hinged on its ability to adapt. In the 7th and 8th centuries, the empire faced massive invasions by Arab Muslim forces, who rapidly expanded across the Middle East and North Africa. Byzantium lost Egypt, Syria, and the Holy Land, but held Constantinople. The city's triple walls and the deadly use of Greek fire helped the empire endure against overwhelming odds. During this era, a spiritual conflict shook the empire from within: iconoclasm. Emperors banned religious icons, sparking violent disputes between iconoclasts and iconodules. Entire monasteries were burned, and civil unrest nearly tore the empire apart. Byzantium was not only fighting for its borders, but for its soul. The 9th and 10th centuries brought a resurgence. Under the Macedonian dynasty, Byzantium stabilized and expanded. Emperors like Basil I and Basil II, known as the Bulgar Slayer, revived military strength and imposed imperial order. Basil II crushed the Bulgarian Empire in a brutal campaign, famously blinding 15,000 prisoners and sending them back in rows to their defeated king. This was a time of territorial reconquest and economic revival, with Constantinople once again becoming the envy of the Christian world. Trade flourished. Diplomats and merchants from Europe, Asia, and the Islamic world passed through Byzantine ports. The empire became a cultural bridge, preserving ancient Greek and Roman texts, influencing Slavic nations, and spreading Orthodox Christianity to places like Kievan Rus, the precursor of modern Russia and Ukraine. Byzantine missionaries Cyril and Methodius even created the Cyrillic alphabet, cementing Byzantium's lasting cultural footprint. But no empire is immune to internal decay. Power struggles and civil wars began to erode the foundations of the empire. The aristocracy grew richer while the peasantry suffered. By the 11th century, weak emperors sat on the throne, manipulated by court factions and undermined by regional lords. The once mighty army became fragmented, relying increasingly on unreliable mercenaries. Then came 1071, a year that shattered Byzantine pride. At the Battle of Manzikert, Emperor Romanos IV faced the Seljuk Turks and lost disastrously. He was captured, humiliated, and later blinded by his rivals. More importantly, Byzantium lost control over most of Anatolia, the heartland of its economy and military power. The empire would never fully recover. In a desperate attempt to regain lost ground, the Byzantines turned west, to the rising powers of Catholic Europe. Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, seeing the threat of Turkish expansion, appealed to Pope Urban II for military aid. This plea led to an unexpected result: the First Crusade. While the Crusaders initially helped Byzantium reclaim some territory, they also brought deep mistrust and a cultural and religious rift that would only widen. By the 12th century, the empire was walking a tightrope. The Komnenian Restoration briefly revived Byzantine prestige through strategic diplomacy, military reforms, and clever marriages. But after the death of Manuel I Komnenos, everything unraveled. Weak successors squandered alliances, overtaxed the people, and failed to stop internal decay. The empire looked strong from the outside, but inside, it was hollowing out. The true disaster came not from the east, but the west. In 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, Latin Christian armies, originally bound for the Holy Land, turned their swords toward Constantinople. They sacked the city in a blood-soaked orgy of looting, burning, and desecration. The Latin Empire was established in its place, and for the first time in centuries, Byzantium ceased to exist as a unified state. Though the Byzantines managed to reclaim Constantinople in 1261, the empire that returned was a shadow of its former self. Fragmented, impoverished, and hemmed in by enemies on all sides, it limped on for nearly 2 more centuries. Constantinople's magnificent walls still stood, but within them, the heart of the empire was dying. What kept the Byzantine Empire standing for over 1,000 years, long after Rome had crumbled? The answer lies in its deeply strategic structure. Unlike the chaotic leadership of the Western Roman Empire, Byzantium created a centralized, adaptable bureaucracy. Civil service exams, rotating provincial governors, and a tightly controlled tax system allowed the empire to function even when emperors were weak or short-lived. At the heart of this machine was the city of Constantinople, a marvel of urban planning, commerce, and defense. Its location along the Bosporus Strait turned it into a gatekeeper between Europe and Asia, and its wealth flowed from trade routes that connected the Silk Road to the Mediterranean. Triple-layered walls and an unbreachable harbor chain made it nearly invincible to siege. until gunpowder changed the rules of war. Militarily, Byzantium evolved beyond the Roman legion. They created the theme system, where provinces were tied to military units, and soldiers were granted land in exchange for service. This ensured local defense and loyalty, while reducing the empire's reliance on foreign mercenaries, at least for a time. Elite forces like the Varangian Guard, composed of Norse and Anglo-Saxon warriors, protected the emperor with brutal loyalty. The Byzantines also mastered the art of diplomacy. They used marriage alliances, espionage, and bribes to play enemies against one another. Their secret weapon? Greek fire, a mysterious incendiary compound that could burn even on water. It became a symbol of Byzantine ingenuity and deterrence, terrifying naval enemies for centuries. Religion played a dual role, both as a unifying force and a source of division. The emperor was seen not just as a political leader, but as God's chosen representative on earth. This idea of Caesaropapism, where church and state were intertwined, gave Byzantine rulers immense ideological power, but it also led to fierce theological disputes and the eventual Great Schism with the Catholic West. What if I told you the Byzantines had secret manuals of statecraft, passed between emperors like coded handbooks of survival? One of the most fascinating is the De Administrando Imperio, written by Emperor Constantine VII. This book was a geopolitical guide teaching future rulers how to manipulate foreign powers, exploit their divisions, and maintain dominance, not with swords, but with strategy. And while many think the Crusaders were allies of Byzantium, the reality is darker. In 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, Western European Christians turned on their Eastern brethren, looting, burning, and desecrating Constantinople in one of history's most shocking betrayals. Churches were sacked, relics stolen, and the empire never truly recovered from the blow. Even stranger? The Byzantines may have been among the first to create a spy network across Europe and the Middle East, embedding monks and merchants as informants. Their letters would travel disguised inside religious scrolls and diplomatic gifts, creating an intelligence web that influenced treaties, wars, and dynastic successions behind the scenes. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 didn't just end an empire, it marked the end of the medieval world and the dawn of a new era. When Mehmed II's Ottoman army breached the walls of the city, the shockwaves were felt across Europe. Many Byzantine scholars fled west, carrying with them ancient Greek texts. Their arrival helped ignite the European Renaissance, reshaping philosophy, science, and art. The Orthodox Church, which once stood unified with Rome under the early Byzantines, remained permanently split after the Great Schism of 1054. To this day, the divide between Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism echoes in the religious and political tensions across Eastern Europe, Russia, and the Balkans. Even the idea of empire itself changed. The Byzantines refined the model of centralized bureaucratic rule and passed it on. Russia adopted the title Third Rome, claiming direct descent from the Byzantine legacy. The double-headed eagle of Byzantium still appears on the Russian coat of arms. The echoes of the Eastern Roman Empire never truly faded. They were absorbed, reinterpreted, and reawakened in modern states. Imagine the golden domes of Constantinople catching the last light of the sun, as priests chant in Hagia Sophia for the final time under Christian rule. Outside, the Ottoman banners rise. The Byzantine Empire, once the heartbeat of the ancient world, is about to vanish. But like all great stories, its end was just a transformation. The Byzantines preserved the Roman flame when the West forgot it. They kept alive philosophies, languages, laws, and artistic traditions that would later shape the very foundations of Europe. They were guardians of a bridge between antiquity and the modern world. So when we speak of the Byzantine Empire, we're not just talking about an empire that fell. We're talking about a civilization that refused to be erased, that whispered its legacy into the stones of every cathedral, every university, every constitution that came after. And now, you've heard its full story.